Welcome. Today we're going to talk about how to create an expense report by associating a travel authorization. An expense report in PeopleSoft makes it easy to transform a handful of receipts into a final expense reimbursement. This quick video will show how to create an expense report by copying the associated travel authorization. Remember, travel authorizations are required for expenses $5,000 or greater, all foreign travel, and all travel advances. Before we begin, here are a few tips and tricks that will help when associating a travel advance to an expense report. Before selecting a travel authorization to copy, be sure to read the description and dates closely to ensure you are selecting the correct one. Once it is associated, the expense report cannot be deleted. To add additional hotel lodging and meal expense lines to show expenses for all days, use the Insert Lines button to add the lines directly below that specific expense. This will keep all of the expense types together. To begin creating an expense report by associating a travel authorization, navigate to Main Menu, Employee Self-Service, Travel and Expenses, Expense Reports, and Create Modify. Remember, as the proxy, your USCID will default here. To select the USCID for the traveler you are creating the transaction for, click the hourglass button, type their last name in the name field, and click the lookup button. Then select your traveler. Now click the Add button. To copy a travel authorization into this expense report, click the drop-down arrow from the Quick Start menu, select a travel authorization, and click Go. Before selecting your travel authorization to copy, make sure you read the travel authorization description, you look at the authorization ID very carefully, and you identify the dates. When you're sure you have selected the appropriate travel authorization, click the Select button. Notice that all of the expense lines from the travel authorization have been copied over into the expense report. We have 4 expense lines. We have air travel expenses, ground transportation, hotel and lodging, and meal expenses. The accounting details have also copied over from the travel authorization, so they won't need to be updated unless necessary. Okay, now it's time to update your descriptions and your amounts. Sometimes the descriptions need to be changed, sometimes they do not. So you can make that decision as you're completing your expense report. So let's begin with the air travel expenses. The description is good here, so I don't need to make any changes, but do need to update the amounts. When adding the accurate cost or the accurate expenses, um, be sure to make your any necessary conversions outside of PeopleSoft, and that the amounts that you're entering in PeopleSoft are actually in American dollars. So the actual cost for the airline ticket was $1,200 and $1,265. We actually do have an airline a ticket number right now, so we're just going to say Delta 1234, and you will find that Delta or that ticket number on your receipt. Notice that the amount field in the accounting details has been updated. Let's move down to ground transportation. My description is good here. Let's update the amount to the actual amount, which would be $145.67. Let's click in the amount field in the accounting details to update it. Let's scroll down to hotel and lodging. My description is fine here. It's just important to note that you do not need an additional hotel and lodging expense line unless the nightly rate changed. So maybe throughout your stay, the nightly rate changed, or maybe you changed hotels and that rate is different. If that's the case, you would have to add an additional expense line. But if your rate was the same for all nights away, then only one line is necessary. So for our quick trip, the rate stayed the same. And so the actual amount for our hotel was $896.75. Let's click in the amount field to update. All right, so now let's scroll down to our meal expense line. As you notice, this expense report is only for one day, and that's just for the purpose of this example. But in reality, specifically when traveling to Hong Kong, you're going to be gone for several days. And so we are requiring at least 3 days or 3 expense lines for meal expenses. One to identify the first day of travel, the second line to identify days of travel in between, and then finally the third line to identify the last day of travel. So let's update our description here to meals for first day of travel. Left at 6 a.m. and arrived at 11 p.m. We want to identify the time that we left, the time that we arrived, so that we can actually show why we are putting in the total amount that we are, to actually validate the per diem amount that we're including here. So because we left so early and got there so late, we're actually going to get the full amount of per diem for our trip for Hong Kong, which would be $144. And we're going to click in our amount field, and it's going to update that field. We're going to click the Insert Lines button to add our second meal expense line. We're going to click the drop-down arrow. We're going to select Meal Expenses. In this box, we're going to say all meals for all days in between. And that's going to equal 2 days. And so that would be $288. Click in the amount field to update that field. We're going to add one more final line for meal expenses. We're going to click the Insert Lines button. We're going to go down, click the drop-down arrow, select Meal Expenses, and we're going to say last day for meals. And once again, we're going to identify the time we left and the time we arrived. Left at 6:30 a.m. and arrived at 9 p.m., which means that we are going to get the full per diem amount for that day. Okay, click in the amount field to update that field. So now, I believe we have all of our expense lines added. We've updated our descriptions. We've updated our amounts to the actual amounts, making sure that it's American dollars. Oh, almost forgot one more thing. We need to make sure we add our attachments. So we're going to click our attachments button. And receipts are required for hotel lodging, rental car, miscellaneous expenses, air travel, and registration. Also, it's very important that you attach the travel and expense authorized signature forms, as this is required. And you can do all of that by clicking the Add Attachment button. So we're going to add a hotel receipt. And here's our hotel receipt. We're going to upload. And we're going to click OK. It's important to add the attachments right up here at the header level, and you can scan all of those receipts together as one document and attach as one document right here. All right, now it's time to save for later. So let's click the Save for Later button. Okay, we need to identify, clicking the Save for Later button will help us identify any red flags, any red boxes that need to be fixed, information updated. And so it's giving us a red flag for our ticket number. So let's click the flag. It says it's a duplicate ticket number entered. So we need to go out here and we need to make sure that we make the change so it's not showing a duplicate ticket number. Go up here, click the Save for Later, and there we go. So the change has been made. The red box is gone. Let's scroll down to make sure that everything else is correct and that we've included everything that's necessary. Looks like we're good to go. Now we can click the Summary and Submit button. You have your report ID, and notice that your report ID begins with a 3, and your travel authorizations, all of those will begin with a 1. Your travel advances will begin with a 2, and your report IDs will begin with a 3. And that will help identify them as you're approving, when you're viewing transactions, and when you're modifying transactions. Once again, this description field is very limited. It will only allow you to enter so much information. So if you feel additional information is required for your travelers and or your approvers to read as they're approving these transactions, then you can click the notes link and you can add additional notes here. So I'm just going to say this is a test and I'm going to click the Add Notes button. Notice that the note drops down to the bottom here. It identifies who created the note and when the note was created. You can add as many notes as you like, and they will follow the transaction as it goes through the approval workflow. Here we go. As you can see, the note's been added. We can click OK. Notice that the speech bubble now has squiggle lines identifying that notes have been added. Now we're ready to submit. So let's click here saying that we certify that the expenses submitted are accurate and comply with the University of South Carolina's travel policy. Let's click the expense report button. We're going to click OK to confirm the submission. Notice that your expense report has been submitted for approval. Even though the status is saying submission in process, we can change that by clicking the Refresh Approval Status button. And now it says that it's been submitted for approval. You can go down here and click the Approval History Expand button, and that will show you the approval workflow. So it's going to go to the report, the expense report employee first. So the traveler that you're creating this transaction for will receive this transaction for approval. It will move on to approval 1, approval level 2, and then the final level of approval will be the travel department. Your expense report is complete, and it is ready for, it's been submitted for approval. And once it gets through the approval workflow and the travel office makes that final approval, then it will be ready for payment. Thank you so much for joining me.